has been something that's perpetuated. Okay, well, I guess we're live again. Okay, so
We are live.
picking up
We
part two of episode 2. Tina wants to go down the El Coyote rabbit hole, which I was not prepared for. So, okay, as Johnny Carson might say, let's get the ball rolling, and we'll talk about the El Coyote. Does that sound like a good idea, Ed? Yes. Sorry, that's a Johnny Carson.
I don't know who Ed is.
Ed McMahon, Johnny Carson. Sorry, I had to throw that in there. You are correct, sir.
That's fair enough. But the thing is, it's not about El Coyote. You're right. El Coyote is actually not that significant. The point is, this restaurant has been profiting off of the Manson name, the 1969 murders name, situation, name, title, event, the Sharon name, the Manson victim name, image. And people have been going to El Coyote because that's where Sharon Tate was last seen and had her dinner, which was never the
now
case.
I don't know how much you want to get me to get into this, and I'm gonna
try to do, because I think in retrospect, the easiest way, if someone wanted to actually look and debunk this myth, because I'm not interested in El Coyote, I'm more interested in debunking the myths.
Okay. Well, that is one that needs to be talked about then, yeah.
Firstly, with El Coyote, like if people just look into recollections of friends, because everyone instantly had to talk about Sharon, reference Sharon, claim that they were invited to a house party at Cielo Drive.
Oh, that's a whole other myth. That's a whole other myth.
With the crimes is that if you look at Sheila and
Sheila Wells,
and how she was invited to Sharon's home and they had a lunch date.
Okay,
and
all right. So
that Sharon had
hold on 1 second.
And saved half for dinner. Yeah, I'll let you.
So this is okay. This gets complicated because, and this is from the Greg King book, I believe. On that night, there is that prevailing story that half of Hollywood was invited to a party at Cielo Drive on August 8th. There was never going to be a party. There wasn't. The story that Greg King tells is that Sheila Wells, Sharon's good friend, who is still alive, and was a very accomplished actress in her own right, she lived not too far from Sharon. And she was going to have a small dinner at her house the night of August 8th. And Sharon was invited and had originally committed to go. As the day went on, it was so hot, she was not feeling well. She didn't want to go anywhere. Deborah has confirmed that. Deborah, as we was supposed to go over to the house on Cielo, she called Sharon to confirm it was okay. Sharon said she was not feeling well. It was too hot. She was very pregnant, not in the mood for company. So Deborah didn't go. She also canceled on Sheila Wells because she didn't want to go out. So just knowing that, there was never a party, but the Sheila Wells connection, she was supposed to go to a dinner at Sheila's house. Sheila called her to confirm. Sharon backed out. So just using that logic, and this was Deborah's argument. She said she has always contended El Coyote never happened because Sharon was feeling so lousy. The last thing she was going to do was put on makeup and get dolled up to go out to dinner. So that's been her point of contention, that they never went there at all. Okay.
And also Sharon was preparing for a film like after giving birth to the child. So she was kind of watching out as to what she would consume when she had that lunch.
Yeah, there was the passage about the lunch that afternoon.
Dinner, we ate half of it. Like these are recorded. Even if we don't look at that aspect, I think the easiest way to prove that El Coyote never took place was the guy who delivered Abigail's bicycle.
And there's a video on YouTube about that. If you look up Cielo Drive on YouTube, for anyone who's interested, and it's got a lot of views, so a lot of people have seen it. It's a really good interview with Dennis Hurst, who was the at the time the delivery boy for the bicycle shop where Abigail Folger and Wojtek that afternoon or a couple days before had purchased a bike and arranged to have it delivered the afternoon of August 8th. Now, according to that interview with Dennis Hurst, who seems like a stand-up guy, he has no reason to lie about anything. I believe he said he dropped that bike off somewhere between like 7 and 8 in the evening, if I'm not mistaken. It could have been earlier, and when he dropped the bike off,
wasn't it Jay who signed the thing?
He went to the door, according to the video. Yeah, that's another one you should see because it's interesting.
Yeah.
He dropped the bike off, put it in the garage, which is open. He walked down the sidewalk to the front door, knocked on the door. According to him, Jay Sebring answered and they had a really quick conversation. He just said, I'm from the bike shop. I delivered the bike. It's right here. I picked up the one that had been delivered that was the wrong color, I think. They dropped off one a couple days earlier that was not the one Abigail wanted. So he picked that up and brought the correct colored bike to the house. He just let Jay know. Jay said, okay, thanks a lot. And that was it. It was, 30 seconds. If all of that is correct, and there's no reason to doubt Dennis Hurst, they couldn't have been at El Coyote having dinner at 7:30 or 8 o'clock if Jay was there to receive the bike at 7:30 or 8 o'clock. So that falls apart. If they were to have gone, it would have had to have been earlier in the evening, and nobody reports having seen them earlier in the evening. Now, the whole thing, again, tell me to stop if you want me to stop, but I don't know how I remembered all this.
No, I don't want you to stop. I want you to continue. But I think, what's crazy, Tim, out of all of this is that like El Coyote has made its name essentially by being associated with Sharon Tate.
Well, it was a popular, in all fairness.
At the time, people, waiters, waitresses themselves who worked at El Coyote said, we don't remember seeing her.
That's correct.
Remember seeing these
I think that whole thing started with the book Helter Skelter, because Vince and Kurt Gentry write in that book that Jay Sebring's name was on the reservation list for that evening. But the restaurant didn't take reservations then. And like you just said, which is correct, nobody reported seeing them there. Not even the waitress who allegedly waited on them. Now, even if the restaurant was packed, and waiters and waitresses forget people all the time, it's just they just deal with it, serve them and move on. But you would remember if all four of them had been there. You would remember having at least some recollection of it. The waitress who allegedly served them said she never saw them that night, and no one working could remember seeing them, nor could any of the patrons. So you put that story, like you just said, together with the timeline of the bike delivery, and it just seems like it could not have happened. Exactly. Now, Sharon did like that restaurant. She did go there. Lots of people like that restaurant. It's an institution. It's been there since the 30s. So it was a hotspot for famous people at the time. But it's highly doubtful, knowing all that and how she was feeling that night, based on what Deborah said too, that she would get all dressed up, feeling crappy, and then go out to dinner, and knowing that it doesn't line up with the other timelines.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a definite. Knowing that, I think it's Hollywood legend at this point, more so than truth.
I mean, I'm just thinking of so many stories, and I don't know if we should share them or if we should let them unfold within time. But I think another very interesting point of discussion, which is going to be a very heavy topic, and I think maybe we should leave it because it's not really a myth. It's an event that happened for another, streaming session, is like the larger untold stories that happen behind the scenes, and how, for instance, Wojtek and Jay knew mutuals in terms of like Tex Watson and drug dealers, and were getting people on their behalf to get drugs from Spawn Ranch, and associations there. So they weren't complete strangers, and Tex Watson was stalking Jay, was trying to stalk him at least the night before when he goes to his house. And
okay, that's a really interesting part of the story, and we're not going to discuss the person who brought that up because I don't think there's any need to.
Yeah,
bring him in. We'll leave that alone.
Yeah,
but that story is intriguing, and the story goes, I don't know if you want to get into that, but there's very little evidence, if any, that Jay knew Tex Watson that I'm aware of, that's documented. He didn't recognize them that night that they broke into the house and committed the crimes. It's not like, hey, Tex, what are you doing here? That didn't happen. Nobody who gave an account of that evening said that things played out that way, that anybody recognized anybody. Maybe they did, but that's never been documented in anything that I've seen. Maybe it's from another source. I could have missed it.
It would have never been documented though, because it's kind of like, remember how we were saying how I should kind of stay away from the drug allegations in terms of Jay Sebring using his hair salon to like sell drugs behind the scenes, because that
Right.
was always alleged. It was never really proven, and we don't want to cause any damage and stuff as to how he made his money. Like,
Mhm. Well,
so
right.
him and Wojtek, and just so I give a bit of context about Wojtek and Abigail, a couple. Wojtek was a Polish film director, lived off of Abigail's money. She was a very rich, wealthy girl. The
Okay.
Folger, Folger
Right.
or Folger?
Folger, Folger. Folger's coffee, still one of the biggest coffee brands
Exactly.
in the world.
Iris. So he was living off of her money. They house it at Cielo Drive because Roman was filming in London, and Sharon was filming in Italy those months. So they house it and stayed at the home. And
Okay.
they fought the destruction of the home because they had a lot of parties, a lot of drugs involved.
That's another aspect.
So
So the
Wojtek,
timeline there, and you
yeah,
know this too, and you can chime in or just tell me to stop. But the
yeah.
timeline for that, so okay, and that's well documented. Many videos and publications have covered that. So Terry leaves Cielo Drive sometime in January of '69, right? Very abruptly. Roman and Sharon move in on February the 15th, 1969. They sign the lease 3 days later. This has been covered. This is not.
Party in March.
They hosted a housewarming party a month later on March. Roman left for South America the next day to do for a film festival, and then went from there to Europe to work on Day of the Dolphin. So Sharon was there for 6 weeks or so by herself with Abigail and Wojtek. Now the problem
Sharon left on the 24th of March to Rome. She took a flight with Altabelli because he was visiting them as well. And March 23rd is when Manson was searching for Terry, and they had a brief encounter. Yeah. So
so while they were gone, this is what gets into the King book too.
Yeah. But the thing is, there were so many drugs involved. So it wouldn't come as a shock if Wojtek and Jay had mutuals get drugs for them on their behalf that were going to.
Is it plausible? Is it plausible? Sure. And it's entirely believable.
With Tex Watson, and it could have been an argument of wanting money and not being paid for the drugs. Like
it might be.
There's the drug burn theory because they found MDMA in their autopsies, and Wojtek and Abigail's autopsies as well. That's why the drug burn theory was such a big thing.
Right. And let's not, I mean, it was the 60s in Hollywood. Drugs were prevalent. Anybody who was there will tell you that. Sure. What we have to be careful, I think, is drawing conclusions about how much somebody like Jay was involved in selling. I know it's in the documentary that he had stuff for his clients. They admit that. We have to be careful. I think I just thought of this. When we do this, we want to not deify and not demonize.
Right.
So we don't want to demonize. We don't want to deify anybody. We want to treat them as people. Like the mistake that a lot of rabid fans of Sharon make is that they treat her as this perfect angel, which is understandable because of the way she died. But that doesn't do her justice as a person. You know, she was a person who was here, who was a living, breathing person with her own flaws and own issues and own strengths and weaknesses. And so was everybody else involved. We don't want to deify. We don't want to demonize.
Well, I think the problem with Sharon Tate fans, which I believe came about after Tarantino's flick, because they just liked her. I think she thought she was a beautiful, sweet, pretty 60s girl. And then they decided, oh, she had a really kind heart. She was so sweet. The problem with that is that there's so much. Sharon is just associated as being a very naive girl who was kind to everyone. And that is such a limiting viewpoint to have of a person, that a girl is just naive and young and doesn't know anything and is just sweet. I mean, there's even if you just study her in photographs, you can't just say that she was shy all the way around. There's different versions of a smile, of the way a person smiles and acts and behaves. And she was a very young, she was 26, so she was very young.
She did a lot of living in 26 years. She packed a lot into her life.
She did. And I'm going to be honest, she doesn't actually seem 26 to me.
She seems older.
Like she could pass as 30 plus. And I don't know if it had to do with the makeup and stuff, but you know what's really interesting, Tim? I don't know if you've noticed this, but You know how like in the early 60s, let's say early to mid 60s, you know how like there were a lot of like newspapers and like all the studios, they wanted to recreate like a new Marilyn Monroe. So like
Yeah,
all their starlets were
yeah.
like
She was branded
girl,
with that. Yeah.
and she was branded, and like, and even in interviews they kept asking her if she could be, if she sees herself as the next Marilyn
She
Monroe.
actually, yeah, listening to those interviews, she had a lot of insight. She was very mature for her age. And I think that was partly due to having lived in so many different places around the world.
Yeah.
She was worldly.
Yeah.
She was not stupid. She had a lot of mature insights into the
Moved to
business and
Italy because her
workplace.
dad got
Yep.
transferred there when she was a teenager,
Mhm.
went to an American school there. Like there's so many things about China that people don't know.
Right. Because
Um,
again, so many of the story is just about the end of her life.
yeah.
Again, coming back to our original point, why now with this series? It's to go beyond just the tired same old stuff that's macabre and dark and it doesn't serve these people. It doesn't honor their memory at all to just remember them as, oh yeah, the victims. It doesn't do any of them justice because their lives, like we said last time, are interesting enough, independent of the way they ended, to warrant being looked at.
But
And
it's also, yeah, but it's also about establishing a difference between the times, like in terms of counterculture, seeing the old generation and the new generation that was coming in and seeing the contrast between those things. Because what I wanted to say about Sharon is, I don't know if I'm sure you've noticed this, but like, you know how like in the early photos, like the earlier shots, that the photo shoots that she did, you've noticed, and not just like with her work and the appearance that she made, but like MGM and Filmways, they really try to get not just the hairdo, Marilyn Monroe-esque, like very 1950s style, but even the makeup. Like she wore the cat eye makeup, and it's so interesting to see the way her makeup changes through the course of just a few years, maybe 3 years,
yeah.
um, to a more 60s, 70s vibe before the 70s even came along. If you
Hmm.
pay attention to her makeup in the really early photo shoots, it's very Marilyn Monroe depicted, very 1950s. And this is the style that the studios were trying to like push onto their actresses.
Hmm. Oh, very much so. And I of the opinion as a man that she got more beautiful the older she got.
See,
You know,
her mom has the opposite view. Her
that's true.
mom
Yeah,
said
I personally,
when
I
18
thought
years old.
she got more beautiful as she got older. Sharon in her 40s and 50s would have been stunning. I mean, it's just so sad. But going back, I don't know if you want to go back to circle back to that timeline or of where they left and everything. The problem, I think, really started with the darker side of LA infiltrating the Cielo Drive house. Is that in the absence of Roman and Sharon, when they were away in Europe for that summer, most of the summer and spring, we're not really sure just how much shady activity was going on there. But according to Greg King and people like him, it was considerable. I mean, there were people they didn't know coming in there, in and out, possibly bringing drugs in or whatever else, parties being held there they weren't aware of. And he writes that when she came back that July, she was pretty horrified by what she found and the kinds of people that were hanging out there. And she
Yeah,
wanted Abigail and Wojtek to move out. She was really
of
pretty.
course.
She told
She
her, I think her mother told that story.
And she
She
was
wanted
very
them gone.
frustrated, Wojtek. Yeah, because he ruined the home with
Yeah.
the drugs and bringing all these people over. And
Mhm.
I wouldn't think it's a stretch to consider that Wojtek would have had, you don't know what kind of shady figures
No, we
went to
don't.
that house. And you know, the real tragedy here, which is the ongoing theme of maybe the screenplay as well, is that when we see these rich people failing to assess the capabilities of the true outsiders to the
Mhm.
establishment, hungry, starving hippies that seem harmless when you're inviting them to all these house parties. So the 1969 crimes and events that took place ultimately changed the way people moved about. No more
Absolutely.
open house parties and stuff. Um, and I think that's why, like, the reason why, for instance, Terry and Candice Bergen, the reason why I think they rekindled their romance and were together for a few years and could be together was that one thing they had in common was that they were children of Hollywood because their parents were famous, and
Right.
they were caught between their parents' generation, the old school strict generation that was on its way out, and the new generation counterculture that was coming in. And despite that they came from the establishment, they wanted to embrace counterculture. And I don't know if you know about this story, but Doris Day, it must have been 1963, because that's when Move Over Darling came out. Move Over
Don't.
Darling. It's a Doris Day song.
Okay.
So Doris would record a lot of song. Now, this is someone acting in the 1950s, old Hollywood, very, her old, let's say old fashioned for Terry standards. Okay. Because we're looking at, right. So she refused to record a song with Terry until he got a haircut, and she kept being insistent. And there's a story, and this was from a 1960s magazine,
Oh, I didn't
where
know that. Okay.
he just stormed out of the room. And I kind of like that as like a flashback scene to just show the tension between counterculture and like the old system.
Oh,
Um,
sure. Absolutely.
and it's funny because there's also, I can't remember his name. There's this photographer who was in France, Jean-Paul something. I don't know his name, so I don't want to say anything wrong. He took a photo of like an elderly woman. So let's say she was born in the 1920s. And then there was a young girl wearing a mini skirt. So one was in a very conservative clothing, and the other one was in a mini skirt, stylish, crossed legs. And the elderly woman, this is probably at a Persian cafe in France, she looks at her with just really judging her and contemplating and analyzing her. And it's such a great photo because it shows the difference between the old generation and the new generation. So I really like that sort of thing.
There's one of David Crosby too, and his father, very much like that,
Really?
where David
Oh,
it had to be the Birds era, or maybe the Crosby, Stills, and Nash era. He's got the long hair, the mustache, and he's standing next to Floyd Crosby, his father, who was an old school Hollywood cinematographer, in his suit, like in his Mad Men suit, skinny tie, skinny lapels, very
right.
stern looking, horn rimmed glasses, standing next to David, who just has this Cheshire Cat grin on his face. And it perfectly, it's very much like that, shows the difference between generations.
That's
So
funny.
yeah, there was a difference there, and it's a fascinating era. And this is more than just it was Terry and Sharon and Jay. This is kind of looking at the times too. The
I mean,
times is a character. The 60s
there's
are a character.
there's so many personalities. I mean, I was just listening maybe earlier this week. I was watching rather Cass Elliott's performance of Dream a Little Dream of
Oh
Me.
man, yeah.
And
Talk
I
about
remember back in the day when I was listening to it several years ago, the comments made me sad because they were just saying what a beautiful voice. Everyone could
oh
just
yeah.
not past the fact that she was extremely overweight, but what a beautiful voice. And all of that made me sad because I was watching this beautiful performance of her singing, and I was just thinking to myself, my God, Mama Cass, because they were all called like Mama Michelle, Mama Cass, Papa John, like they were all the mamas and the papas were like mamas and papas, literally. So Mama Cass, I was like, Cass Elliot, there is so much that these people do not know about you. They do
Oh
not
man. That's good that you brought her up because she
they
was
do not know
essential.
about all the drugs and the parties that you hosted at your house and
Well,
invited all of these people. They do not know about your two shady boyfriends. If people want to really understand this woman with a beautiful voice, so much talent, her insecurity in relationships and with men, had two boyfriends that were drug dealers, Billy Doyle and another guy. These were the
Pick
same
Dawson.
guys that were
Allegedly, yeah.
the first suspects of who committed the crimes. And if you look at their shady business, their involvement, I mean, even with Jay Sebring, there's a thread I have on this. I don't have this right now, and it's going to take a while for me to find it. So I'm going to have to save it for another time. The reason why the drugs were so suspect was because Jay's secretary at the hair salon, her boyfriend, was, I believe, murdered by the Manson family because there's a thread that I made and he was dealing drugs. So there were a lot of Manson murders that went unnoticed. And thanks to People Magazine Online, they actually produced an article and sourced my tweets a few years back.
Really?
So
Okay.
happy about that. Yeah. So one of the people a guy that was killed, his girlfriend, he was a drug dealer. His girlfriend took calls and stuff, and she was Jay's secretary. I don't remember their names because there was so much research that I did. And
again,
I don't
that's all possible. We have it's like I
little
said before.
cracks. It's little cracks here and there, but for safety, I'm just going to portray Jay just hiding drugs for personal use. Like there could be just a scene where he's
As
doing
probably everybody did back then. I mean,
and he's
looking at it,
some cocaine, and not actually selling it behind the scenes, behind closed doors to his clients and making his money that way. I don't want to address that because it's just going to invite controversy and not to mention probably lawsuits. And I don't want to be disrespectful to
no,
Jay's
and besides, and that's
with the crimes and the recreation of those stories. So yeah.
Again, like we said, don't demonize, don't deify. And it's hard to draw conclusive connections to that because like I said, the further away in time we get from this stuff, the harder it is to substantiate things. But there's plenty about him that's positive that we know about. I mean, Jay was a pretty remarkable guy. Like we said last time, he opened that shop on Fairfax Avenue, which for now is still there, although it may be torn down soon. He opened that in March of '59, almost 66 years ago this month. He was broke when he did that. It's in the documentary. He had no money. Basically, everything he had, he put into this place. 2 years later, he was on To Tell the Truth as the most famous men's hairstylist in the country. That's pretty remarkable. And that's the part that never gets mentioned. Like everybody knew Jay.
Is To Tell the Truth. Was that just the show that he went on?
It was a game show kind of thing where they put like 3 people on.
He provided classes on cutting hair, which are available on YouTube. That's something else, right? Was that a promotion?
Yeah. Well, when he died, he was on the verge of opening schools to teach the Sebring method.
Yeah, because there were classes. And you can actually watch some of them on YouTube. But I believe that show is where he's wearing the red button shirt, the gold vest, the blue pants.
That could have been that's in the documentary too. That could have been from his appearance on the Batman show.
That's probably it. Yeah.
There was a video that the documentary actually opens with him making this video in the summer of 1969 at his shop where he's kind of going through working on different people.
I love that.
Yeah.
Because if you I've watched for as long as I couldn't gain access to the documentary, and I have no idea why I can't. I hate the fact that it won't stream in Europe or it's not available and it's hard to find. But now I'm fine. I'm lucky. I got hold of it. But I love that trailer, and I've seen it so many times. Just before it gets ugly, midway to the Manson part, the Cutting to the Truth trailer, which is such an excellent name, Cutting to the Truth.
The way it's done, I mean, it's done with
that opening scene where he gets out of the car with his shades, walks towards his hair salon.
Yep.
We have to recreate that in real time.
Well, I mean, and Tarantino says in that documentary towards the end, he says, why was Jay such a popular, cool guy? And he says he did a great job. He gave good haircuts. He did a wonderful job for his clients, but he was a cool guy and people dug him. It's like all those big time actors, they just liked him. That was part of his appeal, is he was a likable, generous guy. And these Hollywood big shots dug him. So that was the key to a lot of his success. And that's the part that we don't hear about. It's just, the guy who cut hair, and wasn't he a Manson victim? That's where it stops for most people.
Yeah. And I think he's interesting enough of a personality by himself.
Absolutely. I would love it if Anthony DiMaria would come on here and talk to us. That would be such a good time.
I mean, honestly, I would be happy to meet with him, network with him, talk to him in private, and obviously send him like extracts of Jay's scenes in the screenplay to gain further approval and to just let him know we're coming from a good place, and trying to actually elaborate on his life and his personality and things that he did, and just be remembered in a different light, and to just make it very alive. I want this series to be a film that's alive. I find that, working on this screenplay I feel like I've healed as a writer, because I've kind of delved into happy moments and happy things and subjects matters, even though some get a bit dark, because I'm mostly drawn to like psychological thrillers and dark themes. So this is a very light story screenplay to develop and work with, and beautiful. And that's what I like about it. And that's how they deserve to be remembered. So.
Absolutely. Boy, you said that perfectly. You just said that perfectly. Yeah, there's nothing I can say that would make that better. That is exactly
Oh,
what
I'm sure you can. No,
that's perfectly put. I mean, that's what we want to do. And that's what you told me about this 4 years ago. It's like, what do you think about this? Like, that is a great idea. And, we never know what's going to touch us in life, whose stories are going to touch us. I think the stories of the times and these people touched both of us. And we recognize the fact that their stories have been mishandled over the years, or just one-dimensional.
100%.
They don't focus on the people. It's just, oh yeah, the true crime. And you're right, we do have a problem in this country with focusing on this dark stuff. It draws an audience, and that's why there's been so many remakes and rip-offs of this story.
Yeah. Well, you know what I'm fed up with? I'm fed up with America glorifying true crime, romanticizing this obsession with serial killers. And I think that someone needs to challenge this narrative and perspective on the Manson crimes and portray the story differently. And I think we have to be the ones that do it.
I
strongly believe in this, and I believe this can be done. And I'm just going to challenge the perspective. So I really want to change the way in which we are approaching a lot of these stories, and reducing all these people into victims, especially when there's so much interesting insight on all of these people. And you're right, Tim.
Exactly.
We do need to devote episodes on just specific people and looking into them, because even Dennis Wilson, if you look at his relationship,
that's such a sad story. I mean, it's such a sad story.
Running to the beach to escape his dad, who was like abusive and alcoholic, and you can understand why he fell down to Charles Manson and became a victim, and see how Charlie manipulated him into telling him things.
And I think he felt bad about that. He was haunted by that till the day he died. Dennis
was drowned. Like, that was his karma, Tim, to get drowned into the ocean.
Well, there's a whole other deal about that.
Yeah. So there's so many people behind this. And I think with Dennis Wilson, if people look into the most important, the most exciting thing that I've written in 1968 was spring of 1968, where he picks up Ella Jo Bailey and Patricia Krenwinkel, the two hitchhikers, the Manson girls, and brings them over to his house for milk and cookies. They stay over, they roll joints together, they listen to records the next day, and they eventually go to Manson and say, "We met a Beach Boy, and let's introduce you to him." That's where it all started.
It's so sad, because there are it's sad because if certain incidents like this, like what you just mentioned, had not happened, these people would have lived. If he had not stopped to pick up those, and he wouldn't have known this back then. There's no way you could have known. But if he had not stopped to pick them up, Sharon and Jay could still be alive. If Sharon had gone to Sheila Wells' house for dinner that night, she'd probably still be alive.
Yeah, but
if Jay had just dropped her off and then went home, he'd probably still be alive. It's so sad.
As bad as it was karmic, and I don't think it would have been avoidable, because I do believe in people's lives karma. Like, I think it's very sad when a person dies suddenly and experiences a sudden death, but I do believe somehow that it's all karmic, that these things happen for a karmic reason, and they're difficult discussions to have. But even with Dennis Wilson, a boy that grew up going to the beach, avoiding his dad, who was an alcoholic and extremely abusive, and found his peace there, and eventually reaches the end of his life at a young age in the 80s and dies and gets drowned in the ocean. That was karmic. That was a karmic condition for Dennis.
Yeah. It's
So
sad because he was, by all accounts, he was a kind-hearted dude, easygoing, liked to party, which may have been part of his undoing. But how he got mixed up in that, it's so sad.
yeah, and it is sad, but I think that's why their stories need to be shared and told, because even all these insights are just so fascinating enough to get to know about all of them. And it's just, yeah, yeah,
It's like we said before, it's we have these principal characters, but the times are a character too. The 60s are a character
yeah.
in this series.
I did mention how I wasn't going to mention this in the podcast, but there's so many interesting things going around, even in the circles between these people. Michelle Phillips getting passed around like weed. People.
Again, I think even she has said that she had a lot of fun during that time, and a lot of people did. It was a different time.
It was.
Well, let's talk about just briefly, if you want to circle back to the birds and how they came to be, because so much is interconnected here. Everybody knew everybody who knew everybody. So I don't think we mentioned this last time about how they actually got together. So, and this is documented. This has been in, I don't think so.
No, on the birds.
On the bird,
The thing with the birds, though, is that we need to actually spend an entire session just talking about the birds, because there's a lot to uncover there.
You could easily do it. Yeah.
There's a lot. And like I said, I really love those little details, like with Roger, how like he went by Jim for years until he switched to Roger in 67. And it was literally because of spiritual advisors telling him that name, Roger, would vibrate better in the universe.
It was something like that.
It's like, I like those sort of facts. I think they're good.
I mean, you could spend the whole, you could just say, okay, look, now we're going to look at Laurel Canyon and the music scene. Oh, well, how much time do you have? They were
Laurel Canyon, I don't have much time. I think we have to stop in a few minutes just for safety reasons and for just easier uploading. But Laurel Canyon, well, the great thing about Laurel Canyon is that, like, yes, these musicians loved going to the music venues and entertainment venues and Whiskey A Go-Go and the Troubadour and Sunset Strip and whatever. But if you actually look at the way they lived in strawberry fields of heaven, or I feel like Laurel Canyon looks like where you would sit and write Led Zeppelin songs. Like, I'm surprised that Led Zeppelin are like English.
I'm sure they spent time there at some point.
I hope they had a house at Laurel Canyon, because that's, of course,
Zeppelin, I don't think so, but I'm sure they went there. And
anybody
who was anybody went there.
Tim, I have to arrange a flight to California at least around November or something, and just to visit all these places, Benedict Canyon, Laurel Canyon, and just as a source to know what to look for in Cypress.
Well, you're not doing it without me. You're not making that trip without me.
I'm gonna let you know, because you better be around so we can go to the Whiskey A Go-Go. Just literally, this is what I need to do. I need to look at find all these places, and in fact, I don't even.
Don't worry. I think I know them all that are still there. Don't worry. I think I got that covered.
Virtual production and AI, honey, is gonna get that sorted for us, because it is based in the 60s, so it's not like getting the licensing to film in the Whiskey A Go-Go. It's not even going to be beneficial, because
well, I think the whiskey still looks a lot like it did back then. I think the whiskey still looks like it, but there are very few of those places left. It's just a sad fact.
You know what, Tim? It's just a hassle getting a film permit through Film LA. It would just be so much easier to do AI and virtual production. And I know you're not a fan of AI. I know you hate all this AI.
Well, no, here's where I don't like
if it can be used for creative purposes and it can help with creating things, I don't see a problem with it.
No,
I don't know if
you're right. Here's where
an Oscar award, an Academy Award, where his performance is heavily affected and lobbied and influenced by AI. I don't know how much I with that aspect in terms of ethics, but if it can be helped.
That's the part of it I don't like. With everything else, the technical stuff, it can really help. I have no problem with that. I don't like it when it interferes with human performance. If you rob the human of their ability to perform by supplementing with this stuff, that's what I don't like. But if it can help us with backgrounds and settings and set design and all that stuff, I'm all for it. That can save a ton of money. And if it looks good, I'm all for it. I don't like it when it interferes with the human act of performance. That's what I don't like. But the other stuff, yeah, I mean, it could save a ton of money as long as it looks good. If it looks lousy, that could be another problem. But as long as it's convincing and it looks okay, I don't see a problem with it.
Well, with human performance, it's a bit tricky because I think we're going to reach a point where actors are going to be signing away their image rights, so they're not even going to be performing, and
that's a big danger.
Their image. But the thing is, it's a double-edged sword in the sense that it could be dangerous for the production studios and stuff, because if an actor negotiates on their merchandising rights, their image rights, and is able to profit by their giving their rights away, that's good. On the other hand, if there's an in perpetuity clause and they're only paid until a certain point and the production forever holds rights over their image, that's the worst deal to get into. But
this is another big sea change.
Subject. So we'll end things here.
Okay.
And we'll get back to so I'll just end the recording and we can keep talking.
Sounds good.
So yeah.
The Whiskey and Cigarettes podcast.
Yes. See you guys another time.
Yes, sometime soon.
Sometime soon. In a week, hopefully.
Hopefully, yes.
Hopefully, yeah.